Have you ever felt confused after a conversation with someone you care about? Not angry, not even shocked, just confused. Like somehow you walked into the conversation knowing exactly what you felt and walked out questioning your own reality? You wanted clarity, you wanted honesty, you wanted one simple answer. But instead, you got a short phrase, a calm phrase, a phrase that sounded mature, reasonable, harmless, and somehow, that one sentence made you silence your needs, lower your standards, and carry emotional weight that was never yours to carry. What if the real control in relationships does not come from shouting, threats, or obvious manipulation? What if it comes wrapped in soft words? What if the most powerful form of control is the one that makes you believe you are choosing your own suffering? Because that is exactly where many people get trapped, not because they are weak, because they are emotionally invested. Because when you care deeply, your brain does something dangerous. It starts protecting connection, even at the cost of truth. And avoidant people understand this dynamic better than most. Not always consciously, not always with evil intent. But patterns do not need bad intentions to create damage. Some patterns are powerful simply because they keep repeating. You chase understanding, they protect distance. You seek emotional safety, they seek emotional escape. And somewhere in that invisible dance, one phrase quietly becomes a weapon. Not a weapon that attacks you directly, a weapon that makes you attack yourself. You start overthinking. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe I moved too fast. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I should just give them space. Maybe if I become easier to love, they will finally choose me fully. And that is how self-abandonment begins. Not in one dramatic moment, in tiny moments. Moments where you betray your intuition to preserve someone else's comfort. Moments where your nervous system learns that peace comes from staying quiet. Moments where you stop asking, stop expressing, stop needing. Because needing feels dangerous. Because every time you reach for connection, you feel them pulling away. And the human mind hates uncertainty. Psychology shows something brutal about human behavior. People can survive pain, but uncertainty can become addictive torture. Not knowing where you stand, not knowing how they feel, not knowing if you matter. Your mind starts searching for answers like a starving person searching for food. You replay texts, you analyze tone, you study timing. You become emotionally exhausted chasing emotional certainty from someone committed to emotional distance. And here is the terrifying part. You can spend months, even years, inside this pattern without noticing what is really happening. Because the phrase sounds normal. It sounds emotionally intelligent. It sounds like respect. But hidden inside it is a subtle transfer of responsibility. Their withdrawal becomes your problem to manage. Their inconsistency becomes your puzzle to solve. Their lack of emotional availability becomes your opportunity to prove your worth. And that is where people lose themselves. Not because they loved too much, because they loved without boundaries, because nobody taught them that empathy without self-respect becomes self-destruction. Listen carefully. The people most vulnerable to this pattern are not the insecure, the dramatic, or the needy. It is often the loyal ones, the deep feelers, the fixers, the people who believe communication can solve everything, the people who think patience automatically creates intimacy, the people willing to fight for love. Those people often become trapped the longest because they mistake endurance for emotional maturity. But there is a difference between fighting for a relationship and fighting against reality. One builds connection. The other slowly breaks your identity. And if you have ever felt emotionally drained while constantly trying to understand someone who refuses to understand themselves, this matters more than you think. Because by the end of this video, you will understand the one phrase avoidants often use to keep control without looking controlling, why your brain falls for it, and most importantly, how to break free from the invisible psychological loop that keeps intelligent, caring people emotionally stuck, not through games, not through manipulation, through awareness, through emotional power, through understanding what happens inside your mind the moment this phrase enters the conversation. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. And sometimes, one moment of clarity can save you from years of emotional confusion. That hidden loop does not begin with obvious rejection. It begins with a sentence that sounds calm enough to lower your guard. I just need space. Read that again. Not because the words themselves are always harmful. Sometimes people truly do need time alone. Sometimes distance is healthy. Sometimes stepping back prevents greater damage. But this is where emotional psychology becomes important. The same sentence can mean two completely different things depending on the pattern around it. One version creates healing, the other creates control, and most people never learn how to tell the difference. Because when someone says, "I just need space," your heart usually hears something else. Your heart hears, "Do not push, do not upset them, do not make things harder, be understanding, be patient, be safe to love." And suddenly, your attention shifts away from one critical question. What exactly is happening here? Notice what often follows. No clear timeline, no real conversation, no shared understanding, no effort to protect emotional security. Only distance, without direction. And yet you stay emotionally available. You wait. You adjust your behavior. You become careful with your words. You shrink your expectations. You try to look strong while quietly carrying anxiety no one can see. That is not emotional balance. That is emotional suspension. Your life pauses while somebody else decides how much access you deserve. This is why understanding attachment dynamics matters. Human beings are wired for connection. The brain reads emotional closeness as safety. When closeness suddenly becomes unpredictable, the nervous system reacts like something valuable is being taken away. You do not simply miss the person. You begin chasing relief. That difference changes everything, because now the goal is no longer mutual understanding. The goal becomes reducing discomfort. And when people are desperate to reduce discomfort, they accept conditions they would normally question. Think about it. If somebody disappears emotionally, then returns with just enough warmth to keep hope alive, your mind receives mixed signals. Mixed signals create emotional dependency, not because you are irrational, because inconsistency pulls attention. The human brain becomes obsessed with unfinished emotional stories. That is why uncertainty keeps people attached longer than certainty ever could. A clear goodbye hurts. A confusing maybe can consume years. So when "I just need space" appears again and again without accountability, something subtle happens inside you. You stop evaluating their actions. You start managing your reaction. You monitor your emotions. You rehearse conversations in your head. You become focused on avoiding mistakes. You think the solution is becoming calmer, smarter, softer, more patient. But what if the issue was never your delivery? What if you have been working on communication while ignoring incompatibility? That realization can feel brutal because many caring people build their identity around being the one who understands others deeply. They pride themselves on giving grace. Seeing potential, holding on during difficult seasons. There is beauty in that. But there is also danger, because compassion without discernment can blind you to repeated emotional patterns. You can become so committed to understanding someone's struggles that you stop honoring your own limits. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Not everyone who withdraws is manipulating, but repeated withdrawal combined with vague reassurance can still create an unhealthy power imbalance. Intent does not erase impact. A person can be overwhelmed, emotionally guarded, conflict avoidant, or internally confused, and still leave you trapped inside a cycle that slowly damages your confidence. That distinction matters, because this is not about labeling people as villains. This is about recognizing behaviors that affect your emotional health. Too many people stay trapped because they keep asking, "Do they mean well?" A stronger question is this: what is this pattern doing to me? Look at the evidence. Are you becoming more grounded, more secure, more respected, more clear about where you stand, or are you becoming exhausted from carrying emotional ambiguity dressed up as temporary distance? Your body often knows the answer before your mind admits it. Sleep changes, focus changes, mood changes. You feel tension before checking your phone. You measure your worth through small moments of attention. You start losing connection with parts of yourself that once felt stable. That is not a small signal. That is your inner system asking for honesty, because real care does not require you to disappear inside someone else's emotional process. Real connection does not punish you for having needs. Real maturity does not demand endless waiting without mutual effort. And this is where many people face a difficult turning point. They begin realizing that the phrase they feared challenging was never the deepest issue. The deeper issue was what happened after the phrase, the silence, the confusion, the imbalance, the invisible pressure to remain loyal while receiving limited clarity. Once that becomes visible, something powerful starts changing. You stop asking how to hold on tighter. You start asking whether holding on is costing you your peace. And that question can transform everything. That question changes the entire game, because the moment you begin measuring the cost instead of defending the connection, your eyes start opening to something most people overlook. Control does not always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks passive. Sometimes it hides inside emotional unavailability. Sometimes it survives because nobody names what is happening. And one of the strongest psychological traps begins when somebody teaches you to believe that asking for consistency is somehow unfair. Pay attention to this pattern. You bring up concern. You ask for clarity. You try to understand what changed. Instead of direct engagement, the conversation shifts. Now the focus is not the issue you raised. The focus becomes your reaction to the issue. You become too intense, too demanding, too sensitive, not through loud accusation, through subtle reframing, and that shift matters. Because once your mind starts defending your right to feel what you feel, you stop examining the original problem. This is where emotional confusion grows roots. Human psychology has a powerful truth buried inside it. People crave belonging so deeply that many will edit their personality just to reduce the risk of disconnection, not because they lack intelligence, because exclusion touches ancient survival wiring. The nervous system would rather adapt than lose attachment. So what happens? You lower your voice. You soften your boundaries. You convince yourself that bringing up concerns creates pressure. You become easier to disappoint, and you call it understanding. But there is a painful difference between flexibility and self-erasure. One allows growth. The other slowly removes your identity from the relationship. Think about how quietly this happens. No dramatic announcement, no obvious warning sign, just gradual emotional training. You learn which topics create withdrawal. You learn which needs produce coldness. You learn which emotions receive minimal response. Without realizing it, you start organizing your behavior around maintaining access. That is not freedom. That is emotional conditioning. And conditioning becomes powerful when rewards arrive unpredictably. This principle appears everywhere in human behavior. People remain attached to uncertain outcomes because occasional validation keeps hope alive. One warm message after distance. One vulnerable moment after detachment. One deep conversation after days of disconnection. Those moments feel meaningful. They feel like proof. Proof that progress is happening. Proof that things are changing. Proof that your loyalty is finally paying off. But isolated moments do not define relational health. Patterns do. That distinction can protect your future. Because many people do not fall in love with reality. They fall in love with potential mixed with intermittent emotional rewards. They stay committed to what could be while ignoring what repeatedly is. And that gap between hope and reality becomes emotionally expensive. You begin investing energy into managing possibilities instead of evaluating facts. You tell yourself to wait longer, to understand deeper, to hold stronger. Meanwhile, your emotional world becomes smaller. Your confidence becomes quieter. Your standards become negotiable. That is how powerful unresolved dynamics can become, not overnight. Through repetition, through emotional adaptation, through tiny compromises that seem harmless until they become your new normal. Here is a difficult truth many people resist hearing. Healthy connection does not require constant decoding. You should not need detective skills to understand where you stand. You should not feel guilty for wanting dependable communication. You should not feel like emotional security is a luxury item you must earn through endless patience. Mutual care creates clarity, not perfect clarity. Human beings are complex. People struggle. People become overwhelmed. Life becomes messy, but genuine effort leaves evidence. You can feel the difference, not perfection, participation, not flawless words, honest engagement, not emotional perfectionism, shared responsibility. That changes everything, because once responsibility becomes one-sided, exhaustion follows. One person carries emotional labor. One person manages repair. One person keeps conversations alive. One person fights to protect connection while the other remains comfortably distant from accountability. And eventually, something inside you begins asking a dangerous question. What if love means proving I can survive crumbs? That belief destroys people quietly. because it teaches them to celebrate minimum effort while abandoning their deeper needs. It teaches them that longing is intimacy, that confusion is chemistry, that unpredictability equals emotional depth. But emotional depth without stability can become emotional chaos wearing attractive clothing. Read that carefully. Not every intense connection is meaningful. Sometimes intensity is simply unresolved attachment mixed with unmet needs. The body mistakes emotional turbulence for significance. That confusion keeps many people trapped far longer than they expected. And this is where personal power starts returning. Not when someone finally changes. Not when you receive the perfect explanation. Not when everything suddenly becomes easy. Power begins returning when you stop measuring your value through another person's emotional availability. That shift is uncomfortable because it demands something many people avoid: radical honesty. Honesty about what you have been tolerating. Honesty about what you have normalized. Honesty about how much of yourself you have been trading away in exchange for moments of reassurance. Once that honesty arrives, the emotional fog starts lifting. And when the fog lifts, a deeper realization begins forming. Maybe the strongest move is not learning how to keep somebody close. Maybe the strongest move is learning when closeness no longer feels safe for your mind, your self-respect, or your future direction. That realization can shake a person deeply, because many people spend years mastering how to keep others comfortable, but almost no time learning how to recognize when their own inner world is starving. And this is where the hidden mechanism becomes clearer. The phrase was never powerful by itself. Its power came from what it activated inside you: fear, scarcity, urgency, the silent belief that if you do not respond correctly, you could lose someone important. Once fear enters the emotional system, behavior changes fast. People stop operating from confidence. They start operating from preservation. That difference matters. When you operate from confidence, you ask questions. When you operate from preservation, you seek permission. You become focused on keeping the connection alive at any cost. You analyze every interaction. You celebrate tiny improvements. You tolerate emotional climates that would have once felt unacceptable. Not because your standards disappeared, because fear made survival feel more important than truth. This is one of the least discussed realities of human attachment. People do not always stay because they are fulfilled. Many stay because uncertainty keeps activating emotional hunger. The mind begins linking relief with rare moments of closeness. That creates a powerful cycle. Distance creates distress. Attention creates temporary relief. Relief strengthens attachment. Then the cycle repeats. Over time, this pattern can become so familiar that calmness starts feeling unfamiliar. Healthy consistency feels boring. Straightforward communication feels suspicious. Reliable affection feels almost too simple. Why? Because the nervous system adapts to emotional volatility. It learns to expect struggle. It learns to associate effort with value. It learns that love must be earned through endurance. That belief can quietly shape an entire life. Not only romantic experiences, friendships, family dynamics, work relationships, even the relationship you have with yourself. You begin carrying an invisible rule. If I work harder, maybe I will finally receive what I am asking for. That rule exhausts people because it turns every relationship into a performance review. You keep proving, keep adjusting, keep attempting to become more acceptable. Meanwhile, one critical truth stays buried beneath all that effort. You cannot negotiate your way into emotional reciprocity. You cannot convince someone into showing up in ways they are unwilling, unable, or unprepared to show up. That truth hurts because hope often whispers a different story. Hope says one more conversation could fix everything. One more chance, one more explanation, one more sacrifice. But there is a thin line between hope and self-deception, and emotionally aware people sometimes cross that line without noticing, because they are used to finding meaning inside struggle, used to believing persistence solves problems, used to being the dependable one. Yet dependability becomes dangerous when it turns into permanent self-denial. Think carefully about this. What happens to a person who repeatedly ignores internal warning signs? The body begins carrying what the mouth refuses to say. Restlessness increases, energy shifts, motivation drops. Small issues feel heavier. joy becomes harder to access. Not because the person suddenly became weak, because emotional overload rarely stays inside one area of life. It spreads, it touches focus, creativity, sleep, confidence, decision making. The cost expands quietly, and still, many people remain trapped inside the same question: how do I make this work? But sometimes that question hides a deeper issue. You may be trying to solve a dynamic that requires mutual willingness using only your own effort. That is like rowing a boat with one paddle and blaming yourself for moving in circles. No amount of extra effort changes missing cooperation. That realization can feel uncomfortable because it challenges a powerful identity. The identity of being the one who never gives up, the one who can handle complexity, the one who fights through emotional difficulty. Those qualities can be admirable, but strength without discernment becomes self-punishment. Real strength is not measured by how much emotional confusion you can survive. Real strength includes recognizing when your loyalty is no longer protecting love, but protecting a pattern. And patterns do not change because you want them to. They change through awareness, accountability, and active participation from both sides. Without those elements, people often remain stuck inside emotional negotiations that never truly move forward. This is why one shift in thinking can become life-changing. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid losing them?" ask something more confronting. What am I losing by staying locked inside this cycle? That question changes the emotional direction completely. Now the focus moves toward your internal condition, your mental clarity, your emotional dignity, your long-term well-being. And once that shift begins, something surprising happens. You start noticing how much energy has been spent chasing stability from sources that repeatedly created instability. You begin seeing how much of your identity became attached to fixing what was never yours alone to fix. That awareness does not make you cold, it makes you honest. And honesty is powerful, because honest awareness begins dissolving illusions. It separates love from longing, care from chasing, connection from dependency. And when those lines become clear, another uncomfortable truth begins rising to the surface. Sometimes the strongest form of emotional control is not forcing someone to stay. It is making them believe leaving their own suffering would mean abandoning the possibility of being chosen.